Hello YouTube, Dave here again. Welcome to the first installment in a series. I don't know how often I'm going to do these, but a series of videos where I look back at some of the older D&D books in my collections, flip through them, look at them for the first time, sometimes in a long time, and try to decide if they're as good as I remember them. I recently, I guess last year, at the time that I'm recording this, I started a series of videos where I would take a look at a book that I remember not liking and trying to determine if it was as bad as I remember it. And generally, they have kind of held up to my memories of them. I looked at the 3.0 Sonics book, which actually I think ended up being worse than I remember. And then I looked at the Libris Mortis, the Book of the Undead. It was one of the monster ecology books for 3.5 D&D that was probably the weakest of the entire series. And I remember in that video, I kept comparing it to the book that we're going to be taking a look at here today, which is the 3rd edition 3.5 Draconomicon. Now, this is a book that I've talked about a few times and have often mentioned that it was one of my favorite books to come out for 3.5 D&D. And I've seen a lot of people, when they talk about some of their favorite supplements to come out from previous editions of D&D, like the Draconomicon for 3rd edition 3.5 is one of the books that's almost always finds its way into that list. I know on the secondary market, it's commanded some really gross prices. Sometimes I've seen listings of it like $200 to $300. Now I look at eBay and Canadian dollars, so it's a little bit different US, but it's still way more than I would ever spend on a book, even if it's a book that I really, really like. Now, this is actually something that you can find, get print on demand from Drive-Thru RPG or DM's Guild. DM's Guild is the one that I go through for D&D stuff, but it's all the same company. So if you're interested in this book and you don't yet have it in your collection and you're looking to get a physical version of it, or even just the PDF, then I would recommend going through Drive-Thru RPG, DM's Guild, rather than going to somewhere like eBay and trying to find it there. Maybe at your local game store you might be able to find it, but a lot of times used books aren't treated the best. And there's a game store in my area that there was a copy. I can't remember if it was this book or not. I remember it was one of the better received books, and it was pretty beat up. But they were still charging like $60 for it, which to me is just a little bit too much for a book where the corners are all busted up and the spine is frayed and everything like that. So anyway, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the 3rd edition 3.5 Draconomicon. This was 3.5. It came out, I want to say this was like 2004, 2005. We'll see that in a moment. But the first thing here, the inside cover has these, beautiful dragon sketches from Todd Lockwood. And I really wish Todd Lockwood was still doing artwork for D&D. I don't know if he's come back for anything since the 5th edition days, but I really loved his art style, and I would love to see him, make a prominent return back to D&D. This released in November of 2003, so this was just a few months after the launch of 3.5, which came out, I think it was like June or July of 2003. So let's just go ahead and take a look what we got here. So our introduction, chapter 1, is all about dragons. So we've got their anatomy, physiology, life cycle, it's dragon senses. I'm not going to be reading everything that's in here, but we're going to flip through and sort of take a look at everything. Then we got the DM's Guide to Dragons. So this is about running encounters with them, dragon feats and spells, spell descriptions, magic items, layer wards, dragon prestige classes. Some of which are actually, can be used by non-dragons. And then we got the player's perspective, so we got some items here as well. There's the prestige class. Okay, there's the player character prestige classes that you can get. But there's new feats and spells, cleric domains, dragon hide armor. So we will take a look at that. Dragons in the party, dragons as mounts, as cohorts, as special mounts, familiars, or as player characters. And then we got a whole section of new monsters, and then we have our sample dragons and sample hordes, and an index of dragons. So let's get right into it, shall we? Again, one of the things with 3rd edition 3.5, the books were all formatted sort of in this way, so they have got the borders going around. The first page of a chapter has this sort of yellow page to it, and everything else is sort of in white. Oh, I should also mention that the cover, I loved the cover of this book, and it was one of the things that really drew me into it. Because at the time, most of the books that came out for 3.5, not all, but most, were sort of designed to look like they were actual, like physical, like leather-bound old tomes that you would find in like ancient libraries. So they would have sort of like this leather and sort of like jewels and you know like metal bindings going around, and then there would just be like a portrait sort of in the middle of the cover. But this was one of the first 3.5 books to actually have just like a full art cover, and I love that it's like the mother dragon with like the younger, you know, like the young dragon and like little hatchlings coming out. I think that that's really cool. All right, so first we have the dragon's body. Now, this actually goes into quite a bit of detail, going over like the actual anatomy of the dragon. Again, I'm not going to go into it here, but they actually like it's kind of it's an insane amount of detail that I absolutely love. It's one of the things that I just remember like eating up when I first got this book, because you've got like the dragon's eye, and it actually gives you a detailed breakdown of like what the different parts of the dragon's eyes are, how dragon vision works. You know, it actually takes kind of a scientific approach to like dragon's abilities. Then we've got like their skeleton. It has the breakdown of the anatomy of the skeleton with different points that you can sort of look at. Internal organs, including, I think there's one that's like its gland for the dragon. Yeah, I think, yeah, okay. So number 7, right down here, this is the gland where the dragon generates its breath weapons. So that's sort of like, it's near the lungs sort of thing. So again, it's just, it goes into a huge amount of detail, like their muscle structure, their organs, their skeleton, their eye, their metabolism, how that works, whoops, their life cycle. It's just, again, there's just a ton of great information to read here. I just, again, absolutely love it. Like, you got dragon egg information, how long it takes for the dragon to be able to lay an egg, and how long the egg, how long the egg takes to incubate. So it can actually take quite a while. Like a red dragon is 660 days to incubate. That's, you know, it takes a while. So if you wanted to use dragon eggs as like a plot device or like a treasure item, it's something that you can definitely do. But this is a useful chart to have in case you want to determine how long the players have to wait until the egg hatches. It also gives you the incubation temperatures and conditions and environment. For example, I think the black dragon has to be immersed. Oh, it has to be immersed in acid, strong enough to deal at least 1d4 points of damage per round, or sunk into a bog, swamp, or marsh. White dragons, the egg must be buried in snow, encased in ice, or kept in a temperature below 0. So again, just really cool details that you can use, or just read and admire the amount of like creativity that sort of went into it. Then you got a breakdown of the different age categories, and if you are new to the hobby, or like you started with 4th and 5th edition, you're gonna see a lot of age categories here, because in like 4th edition and 5th edition, they kind of just went with like 4 major age categories, which was usually like hatchling, juvenile, adult, and like ancient. Or you might have, instead of hatchling, you might just have like juvenile, young adult, mature adult, and ancient. But there's like a ton of different categories here. So we've got wormling, which is typically for dragons, it's age 0 to 5 years. So it takes them to go from 5, they're not considered a young dragon, a very young dragon, until they are at least 6 years old. 6 to 15 is a very young dragon. Then you have a young dragon, which is considered young from ages 16 to 25. A juvenile, so we've got what, 1, 2, 3. So we have to go through 4 categories, or go through 3 categories, get to a 4th age category just to get to the juvenile dragon. And they're 26 to 50 years. A young adult is 50 to 100 years, or 51 to 100 years. Then you've got just a regular adult dragon. Then you have the mature adult, the old, very old, ancient worm, and great worm. And then it talks about like dragons' natural lifespans. And yeah, dragons technically have like an actual natural lifespan. And when they kind of reach the twilight years of their existence, they're typically compelled to go to a spot that's sort of like just it's sort of like a natural instinct. You get to go to like one of these dragon graveyards where they just basically lay down and quietly pass away. So again, it's kind of interesting. It gives you how many years it typically takes until a dragon reaches that phase of their existence. For some, it's 4,000 plus years, and for the white dragon, I think the white dragon's got the shortest one of just 2,100 years. And interestingly, the chromatic dragons actually have like drastically shorter lifespans than the metallic dragons. Metallic dragons seem to live a lot longer, which I guess it might make sense because they're not typically being fought as much by groups of adventurers. But the one thing to really remember about 3rd edition D&D and older editions going back beyond that is there are actually a lot of age categories as opposed to just the 4. So we've got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Yeah, so there's 12 different age categories of dragons. So one thing to sort of keep in mind if you're like thinking about one of the things I'm going to say later in this book about why I like this book. There's rules for the dragon graveyards. Again, there's rules on the different dragon senses. It goes into how they fly. They're different types of movement that they may have. So it actually sort of goes like it actually shows the art of a dragon taking off. And there's just so much like awesome artwork in here. You got a black dragon swimming. You've got a bronze dragon or brass dragon. Anyway, it's one of the. But I don't know metallic dragons nearly as good as I do chromatic dragons. But you can actually see them like burrowing. Then you actually have like a dragon that has like equipment sort of put on it or different. Almost like a barding kind of thing. So like it shows that you can, it does kind of mention that you can sort of use like actual like weaponry and armor for the dragons, although you don't necessarily need to. Dragon weaknesses, it's a very short section, makes sense. Outlook and psychology. Dragon society, it even goes over like the way that dragons mate. And what's interesting, years ago on Discovery Channel, may have also been on Sci-Fi. We don't have Sci-Fi in Canada, or at least we didn't on the cable at the time. But there was a mockumentary, so like it was a documentary, but it was on a fictitious subject, but it was like, what if dragons were actually real? And what's interesting is, in that documentary, they kind of describe like the mating ritual of dragons, and it's very similar to what's actually in here. The thing is, I can't remember which one came first, but it's interesting. It's like the dragons sort of fly up together like in the air, they spiral around each other, and then they sort of like lock their claws together and then basically like plummet down towards the earth. Basically they try to hold on as absolutely long as they can, and it's sort of like that's like the mating ritual. It was just kind of interesting because that like fake documentary, I want to say it was very similar how they did that. So that's kind of cool. It goes into why do dragons hoard treasure. So there's just a ton of great flavor text that you can have here. Right in the beginning, and there you see like the red dragon hoarding dragon languages. And we've actually got some draconic vocabulary. If you really wanted to get that deep into it, if you wanted to have like draconic words that you decided to speak or have them sort of incorporated into your game, then you can do that. I've never been that involved. Like there's, I think in 4th edition D&D, they had like the Elven and Dwarven like alphabet, which is cool. It's a really cool touch, but I was never that keen on using it to write stuff down. So this, again, it's a cool inclusion, but it's probably not something that I would necessarily use, but it is still neat to have it in there. Then we've got Pigeon Draconic, so there's actually some examples of expressions that you can use, sort of like, kind of like, was it like Pig Latin or something like that, or there's a Pigeon language in like our languages that I forget. I think it's like I think it's Latin. I think Pigeon and Pig Latin is the same thing. Anyway, it's late when I'm recording this, so just please bear with me. But we also have here the Draconic Pantheon. So we actually have a series of gods for the dragons, including, obviously, you've got Bahamut, you've got Tiamat, but you've also got some other ones here as well. So let's take a sort of a quick look at some of them. There's a lot of names that I'm not going to be good at pronouncing, but here they are. Falzer. Okay, so Falzer is sort of like this, like this godlike black dragon, or he appears typically as a black dragon. And Falzer was actually one of the main threats in the second Dungeons and Dragons movie. The one that unfortunately went straight to TV, which it would have been really great if that could have been the one that actually had a movie budget behind it. I think they could have made that movie a lot better. But Falzer was actually one of the gods that was sort of mentioned in there. So again, that's just kind of cool to see. And then we got dragons by kind, so it just goes over like dragon sizes, and then we get into like the different types of dragons, typically just from like the monster manual. But this is really cool because it goes for like over their size. So you have charts about how like wide and long they are, the different parts of their body, like their neck and tail, wingspan, like maximum minimum wingspan, how tall they are when they're standing like up, basically when they're standing on all fours, I believe it is. But then you've also got these really cool sketches for like the ways to identify the specific dragon. So like for the black dragon here, and black dragons are my favorite, my all-time favorite, starting with 3rd edition, because this design with sort of like the skull like face with like the bone sort of armored plates and the curved horns coming forward, that is my favorite dragon design of all time. Black dragon is my absolute favorite. But yeah, being able to see like how their tongue can sometimes hang, or what their mouth looks like when it's closed and their nostrils are closed up for when they go underwater, details on their eye, like a profile view, details on their teeth, and then just sort of like these almost look like they're handwritten notes about like the dragon itself. So black dragons are evil, tempered, cunning, and malevolent. Their crafty, sinister faces reflects this. They are sometimes known as skull dragons for their deeply socketed eyes and distinctive nasal opening. Adding to this impression is the gradual deterioration of the hide around the horn base or cheekbone. This does no harm to the dragon, but increases with age. So again, it's just really cool that they have that. And then they've got sort of what it looks like from underneath or from above. I think that's underneath, actually, because you can see like the legs there. But basically what it would look like flying over, which is really cool. And then we got the blue dragon. So again, we got the same thing. I'm not going to read all of the descriptions, but you've got the information there. Again, you can start to see it flying. Brass dragons. That was a brass dragon. And then we got, oh, I love the bronze dragon, the little hatchling. It just looks so adorable. But this one, the copper dragon hatchling, I'm just going to pick this up and like just tell me that that's not one of the most adorable things you ever seen. Like, I'm not huge on metallic dragons, but I want one of those. it's just so, I don't know, I love it, it's cute. Then we got the gold dragon. So you can sort of see what their wings look like when they're folded and they're on all fours, or when they're sort of sitting with their wings raised up. You need a little bit of like what the hatchling looks like, so it doesn't actually have like the whiskers. And it kind of shows that more whiskers grow in as the dragon ages, which is kind of cool. And we got the green dragon, and with all of its identifiers. The red dragon, another one of my favorite designs. I love that red dragon. The silver dragon. And then we've got the white dragon. And again, the white dragon, I think my like my top 3 favorite dragon designs are all from D&D. But they are like the black dragon, the white dragon, and then the red dragon. So that's, again, so this is all mostly flavor text here. So you get about 50 some odd pages of just information that you can use to sort of enhance your knowledge of dragons, that you can present in your game to make dragons feel like they're a much more like real, detailed, chronicled thing. So yeah, again, it's just really, really cool. Are you going to use the information in this section a ton in your game? Maybe not, but it's still really cool to see it in there. It's a great deal of creativity, and I really appreciate it. And I've tried to actually use like some of the descriptors that they have here for the ways to identify the dragon, even to this day, when I like try to describe it, if the players are encountering it, I'll actually use some of the terms in here. So yeah, so again, really cool stuff. There's also information like about their layers and stuff like that as well, like habits and all kinds of just really cool information in there. Then we get a DM's Guide to Dragons. So dragons as monsters, basically different ideas on running encounters. Different types of encounters, like if they're plotters and schemers in your world, if they're movers or shakers. Sometimes they're, basically just a monster, but again, information on running the encounters, looking at space and reach, which is important to have. Information sort of on their flight, so dragons don't have like the ability to turn on a dime. So it sort of gives you some ideas of how they can maneuver around, including they can do like a wing over where they basically like, cut to their side and flip around a lot quicker. But it still shows you how much movement is needed to do that. So again, it's just great. Like this is really useful information to have in your game regardless. Then we got the different sizes of breath weapons, information on them like strafing. So if they were strafing and using like a breath weapon, again, really cool stuff. When you should use the breath weapon. Back in the days of 3.5, their breath weapon recharged after you would roll a d4 whenever they would use their breath weapon. And whatever you roll on the d4, you would add 1 to. And that's the number of rounds that had to go by before their breath weapon recharges. So it's a little bit different than, say, 5th edition, where you just roll a d6, and if you get a 5 or 6, they can use it right away. Because sometimes, like, I've had it where the dragon gets his breath weapon immediately after using it in the previous round. So I kind of like this method a little bit more. It means there is a little bit of a break potentially between breath weapons. So again, that's just something that's kind of different, but different attack forms here as well, like them crushing you, using their tail sweep. And then we get into Draconic Feats, including stuff like Clinging Breath. I love Clinging Breath. So basically it continues to deal damage to you. Equal to like it's half the damage that it dealt in the previous round, and you can spend like an action to kind of like roll around or to like brush it off or to remove it from you, but it's something that can make a breath weapon really nasty. I think what happens though is that with these like breath weapon feats, it increases the number of rounds. Yeah, so it's a cool ability, but you have to add an additional +1 to the number of rounds you have to wait before you can use the breath weapon again. So if you use the Clinging Breath, for example, you would have to roll a d4 and it'd be a d4 +2 rounds instead of a d4 +1. But again, it's just cool to see like differences in the breath weapons and different things that the dragons can do, because it really makes a difference here. So there's like Clinging Breath, Lingering Breath, Enlarge Breath, so you can actually have it over a wider area. You can heighten it, which increases the saving DC. There's Maximize Breath, which is brutal, because that means that it does max damage, and you don't want to mess with a dragon doing max damage on a breath weapon. I think that adds like 4 rounds, though, before you get it back. What does it say here? Oh, I think I went past it, actually. So, Maximize Breath. Okay, there it is there. DCs for saving throws are unaffected. You must wait, 3 rounds. So, you'd be rolling a D4 +4. So, that's something that, you want to be careful about using, because it could be, like, up to 8 rounds before you get your breath weapon back. But there's just, all kinds of stuff in there. It's not all like breath weapon based, but there's a lot of really cool feats in here. And then we got dragon spells, and they have what are called meta breath spells. And this was one of my favorite things in here, because there is a spell, I think it's energy substitution or breath weapon substitution. So essentially what it does is you cast this spell, and the breath weapon is like part of the spell. So it's kind of like a touch attack kind of thing, where like the actual attack is part of the casting. But what it actually does is you can choose a different energy type and use that when you are basically like using the breath weapon. So you could have, for example, a red dragon use cold, or you could have like, there's just sort of all these different things. And so like I remember I was running this one encounter with there were two different times that I used something. Well, actually the first one wasn't actually from this book, so I'm not going to talk about that here. But there was actually a situation where the players were going to face off with this red dragon. Like they were hunting down like these they were hunting down these dragons, because I think there were cultists that had something that the players were looking for. I forget the exact setup. But there was this red dragon, and the players were prepared for it. So they had all of their, fire resistance and all that stuff on. And the very first thing that this dragon did, because it was a smart dragon, like it wasn't You know, it was an old, or I think it was an old dragon. It was mature adult or old, but it was smart enough to know that, you know, if adventurers are going to enter its lair, they're going to be prepared to deal with fire, which is what these dragons typically do. So this dragon, his opening move was to use breath weapon substitution, and he blasted the player characters with cold. So he substituted the cold for the fire, and the players were just not prepared for that at all. Like, they didn't have anything to resist cold whatsoever. They had stuff to resist fire, and I think one of the players also had like electricity resistance or something like that. No, I didn't metagame that. It's just that this dragon would choose the opposite type of energy, because it would be more secure in the knowledge that they probably wouldn't be prepared to defend against that as they might other sort of things. So it was a really cool, kind of moment. I described like the magical energies that the dragon was forming as it was doing these incantations, taking on this like white coloration. And then as the dragon inhales to blast out its breath weapon, it inhales this white energy into its lungs, and then it blasts out the cold air. And the players were kind of ticked off at me. Oh, also one of the things that one of the feats I'm actually just going to go back, see if I can find it here. But one of the feats that are in this book is the ability to resist or to reduce the vulnerability that you have from certain energy types. I forget exactly what it was. Overcome weakness, and I think there was another one. Or suppress weakness. Okay. So basically what you would do, like suppress weakness, instead of taking like an extra 50% damage or double damage or whatever it was, you would take like half of that extra. And then if you have overcome weakness, you don't take any extra damage. So this dragon also had overcome weakness, so he wasn't vulnerable to cold. He would still take normal damage, but he wasn't vulnerable. So again, just really cool stuff. I remember absolutely loving these dragon breath spells. I thought they were just so cool, so cool to have. And then we got layer wards, so different things that you can use to protect the layers for the dragons. And then our dragon prestige classes. I will admit I never used any of these. Although, like, you have things like the Disciple of Ashardalon, which is pretty cool. The Dragon Ascendant. I never really used any of those. I think Elemental Master was one that I was considering, but I don't think I ever actually used it. And then you got the Sacred Warder of Bahamut, the Unholy Ravager of Tiamat. Actually, I think I did use that one. I could be wrong, because I remember like later in the campaign, the players were going after these champions of Tiamat, and I think one of them had the Unholy Ravager of Tiamat information, but I'm not 100% on that. Information on advancing a dragon, and then the player's perspective. Things to keep in mind when you're fighting a dragon. Different feats to have. Dragon Bane. I think you deal extra damage against the dragon with your regular attacks. Cleric domains. You got Dominion domain, Dragon domain, Greed, Glory, Wealth domain. I don't know. It's cool stuff, I guess. Spells are always good. Although I think a lot of these player spells. Oh no, maybe they weren't. Some of these probably were reprinted in the spell compendium. Dragon hide armor. So this is something that players always ask for when it comes to, when you kill a dragon, wanting to do something with like the dragon's remains. And so this actually gives you some things that you can do. So you got dragon craft, so you can actually make like dragon blood elixirs. So you can take the dragon's blood, mix it into like an alchemical solution, and they can actually grant you different things based on what type of dragon it was. So, for example, a black dragon, if you take their blood and sort of infuse it with put it into like this magical elixir, it grants you dark vision to 120 feet. Blue dragons allow you to mimic sound, functions exactly as the draconic ability, so you can actually mimic things. Brass lets you speak with animals. The white dragon gives you ice walking. It's just, again, it's kind of sort of a cool thing that you don't normally think of necessarily what to do with the blood. It's usually like just the hide that people are interested in, but this actually gives you like dragon fang weapons, bone items, the armor, and the blood. So it actually gives you quite a few different things that you can do with that. I think that's really neat. And we got our different prestige classes here. Again, I was never huge on prestige classes in 3rd edition. So this was a section that I probably never really looked at too much. I think the only one that ever got used in one of my campaigns from this book was the Talon of Tiamat, if it's in here. Yeah, there it is, the Talon of Tiamat. I had a player that was actually playing one of those and was hiding it from the rest of the party. Information on dragon mounts, dragon cohorts, their effective levels, and that's adorable. Dragons as player characters. Truthfully, this is something that honestly I would never recommend messing with, because the turning monsters into player characters was just never good, like ever. It was just never done well. So that's a section that I would honestly recommend not bothering with. And then we got some new monsters. So we got the Abyssal Drake, Dracolich. And then just some other creatures that we've got here, like Dragonkin, which are, I guess, kind of almost an early version of the Dragonborn. There was a Dragonborn in 3rd edition or 3.5, but it wasn't like a true race. It was something that you would get the blessing from Bahamut, I should say, and you would transform into the creature, like into the race of Dragonborn, but you weren't born into them like they were in like 4th edition and so on. So the Dragonkin was probably the closest that you got there. You got some drakes, the Fang Dragon, and yeah. So here, by the way, here is how dragon stats looked in 3rd edition. They were charts. They were just 2 different charts that you would have to cross-reference and fill in some blanks for. It wasn't the worst way to do it, but it was also not the most fun, because I don't know, it was just a lot of, it would take a decent amount of time to like fill out all the information. It probably not too bad, but I was the kind of person who wanted to design the stat blocks to look exactly like they are in the books, and the way that they were in like Dungeon Magazine, because at this point in time I was really wanting to get into submitting stuff to the magazine, so I wanted to really familiarize myself with those stat blocks. Even to this day, when I design creatures for like 5th edition or whatever, I will still format them the same way as the monster manual stats, even if it includes information that I know I'm never going to need for the combat. But yeah, so there was a lot of cross-referencing, sort of filling in stuff. You'd have to choose all the skills, the feats, all that stuff. But it wasn't hard. It was just a little time-consuming. So we'll talk about that in a little bit here as well. But again, we got some different golems, different dragon like bone or stone golems, half dragons, the landworms. These are actually pretty cool as well. The planar dragons. So we have a battle dragon, the chaos dragon. That's a kind of a weird looking one there. I think that's the howling dragon. The ethereal dragon, the ocean. So I like this one because it's kind of like the sea serpent. The pyroclastic dragon. One of these appeared in the very first adventure path that Paizo Publishing put out. So I think it just had one set of stats, but they actually, because I think that issue was like either very early in 3.5 or it was 3.0. No, it was 3.5. But they actually had the full stats in here as well. The Radiant Dragons. Rust Dragons, they're kind of scary. Because they're basically like a rust monster, except they have like their bite rust weapons. And I want to say that they had a breath weapon that could just like rust metal as well. So they were pretty mean. Styx Dragon, so like a sea serpent for the river Styx. The Shadow Dragon, that was a pretty cool looking Shadow Dragon. The Skeletal Dragon, the Squamous Spewer, which is kind of like a draconic gibbering mouther. Vampiric Dragon, Zombie Dragon. And then we get into the part of the book that I used the most. So I mentioned with like the Fang Dragon there that you had to like cross-reference a couple of charts and you had to fill a lot of stuff in. It wasn't hard, like I said, but it was a little time-consuming, so much so that I just didn't enjoy doing it. But this book actually had you covered, because this section is filled, and I mean filled, with sample dragons for each of the types from the monster manual. So the chromatic dragons and the metallic dragons, but for every single age category. So you didn't have to fill the information in yourself. The most you'd have to do is swap out a couple things like feats or spells, or just like maybe rearrange the skills. But here they actually give you like all the different types. They would give you a name for the dragon and a little bit of background information, so you could actually just take the descriptions and plug them into your game as well. So it's not just the stats. They actually give you a little bit of information on the dragon as well that you could use to add to your game. So it's just a really well thought out part of the book, and it was so useful. Because it basically meant that you never had to stat them out again. Like, one of the things that's great about monster manuals is the ability to just like open up the book and drop a monster like right on your players from the book. And with dragons, you really couldn't do that as easily. So this sort of fixed that and remedied that, and I love it. This was something that I used for every single dragon encounter from the time this book came out until the last time that I ran a 3rd edition or 3.5 campaign. This was such a useful part of the book, and it's really hard to kind of understate that or overstate that, I guess. And if you hadn't played those earlier editions where you had to stat out the dragon yourself, even using the monster manual, like, it's just going to be kind of difficult to explain just how annoying it was. So it's just the fact that this is here, and not only do they give you just the stats, because they could have just done that. They could have just given you the stats, but they give you like a little bit of a write-up on the dragon, so you can actually get some information like a personality or some other like background information that you can use to actually just put it into your campaign, and it's awesome. Like, this was a great part of the book. So, and again, there's a lot of pages here because this is all black dragon. So from here all the way to there, so page what, 201. So you get about like 4 or 5 pages, 4 pages of like just statted out, developed dragons, and then you've got like a little map of their lair, which you can also use and just drop it into your game, or you can use it as inspiration for designing your own. So again, this was just a really great section here overall. And again, like, I love the little wormling, and the artwork here is fantastic. But this was such a good part of the book. And generally speaking, this is probably the section of the book that I think people talk about the most, or that people will say that they use the absolute most. So moreover than just like, the feats are cool. The prestige classes, if that's your thing, which they're not mine, but if you like prestige classes, there were some decent ones in here. The spells and feats, like, that was all really cool stuff. The gear and equipment, was also like neat. But I think most people that really, talk about how much they love this book, most of them that I've spoken with anyway, one of the first things that they talk about is this section and how much time it saved them when they were looking to, use dragons. Because again, it's not like in 5th edition where you've got the 4 fully developed stat blocks and you just use whichever one makes the most sense for your game. You had like these 2 charts that you'd have to cross-reference and sort of fill in and fill in some of the blanks and stuff like that. And again, not hard, but it was just tedious, right? And sometimes you don't want tedium. You just want to be able to use your monster manual to just, drop a monster on the players, right? So this was just a huge part. And like, so this is a big section of the book. So it started on like, what was it, page 201? Yeah, so page 201. So we're like 60 pages in, and we still got some other dragons to go through. So there were the red dragons, the silver dragons, and then we've got the white dragons. And then just a little bit of information on Dragon's Hoard. So this was another really useful part of the book as well, because it allowed you to just do a few rolls on charts and have a Dragon's Hoard fully fleshed out. And more so, even if you didn't want to do that, there were just some sample ones that were already done. So again, it just saved a ton of time for a lot of people. And like this last 90 pages or so, almost, of the book is probably the part that got used the absolute most. So there you go. And then you got the true dragons by their challenge rating, by age and by kind. So all the different types of dragons that would have those like charts that you'd have to work with. And then their challenge ratings from Wormling all the way up to Great Worm. And there you go. So that is the Draconomicon. It's actually kind of been a while since I've really flipped through the whole book, and I have to say, yeah, it's as good as I remember it. Nowadays, the part of the book that I would most want to revisit would actually probably be the flavor text on like the dragon's anatomy, their ecology, like stuff like that, like their psychology, things along those lines. That's probably the part of the book that I would go back to want to read. But back in the day, I used this so much. And I mean, so I've had this since November of 2003 because I bought this on release day and I used it a ton, but I tried my best to keep really good care of this book. So I wanted to make sure that, it's held up. But this was a book that got used really heavily from 2003, late 2003 until early to mid 2012, which is when I sort of ran my last 3.5 D&D game until recently. So yeah, I mean, this book got a ton of use, and it's as good as I remember it. Now, that said, there are big sections of this book that I honestly don't have a lot of interest in, particularly the prestige class sections. That was just something I was never interested in. And that's not something that's really changed with time. I just don't like prestige classes. I think that future editions of D&D has done a better job with the concept of prestige classes by turning them into archetypes for your class, or things along those lines that you can take in other RPGs. Like they're sort of like built into the class. Things like the champion fighter, or the arcane trickster, or the eldritch knight, the arcane archer. Like, I think stuff like that as just being a subset of a specific class instead of the prestige class system. So that's a part of the book that I probably will still never read. I kind of glossed over them back in the day. I read the Talent of Tiamat because a player wanted to be one, and I wanted to make sure it wouldn't be that much of a game imbalance. And I had considered, I think, was it the Ravager, the Unholy Ravager of Tiamat, for one of my dragons, but I don't know if I can't remember if I actually pulled the trigger on that one or not. But the stuff that's in here, other than the prestige classes, were things that I used a decent amount. Like the Dragon Breath, the Meta Breath spells for dragons, like that was awesome. Like that's something that really I wish would come back in modern D&D. I'm kind of surprised that it hasn't, but yeah, it'd be really cool to see those. I might even consider trying to adapt some of those for a D&D game, and maybe just turn it to like a draconic ability that they can do, that they can, like, a certain number of times per day they could substitute out, or have it be like an alchemical substance that they have to imbibe in order to do it, or just try to find some way to allow them to do certain things with their breath weapons, like substitute the energy type, or change the area of effect, or increase the difficulty class, or things like that. I think it'd be really cool to have stuff like that back in the game. And the stat blocks and the hordes, like those were things that I used for every dragon encounter over the course of that 9-year span. I used that a ton, and it's still a great part of the book, though again, admittedly, to this day and age where I'm not running any homebrew stuff for 3.5, and I'm not altering the 3.5 things that I'm running, I probably won't use this book in terms of like the stat blocks or the treasure hordes or anything like that, but I still definitely want to go back and reread the chapter on like a dragon anatomy and stuff like that. So the question is, like I said, this book is as good as I remember it from my own personal perspective. The question is it something that I would recommend for people this day and age? And the answer is, it depends. So I would definitely recommend, if you're interested in the material that's included in here, and there is some stuff that you can definitely cherry pick and sort of convert into modern D&D, like feats, spells, even like turning the prestige classes, the features that the prestige classes might grant, into features that a dragon may train towards, or that a player character might be able to pick up using like downtime, or in lieu of taking like their normal class archetype or whatever you might have. So there's still lots of cool ideas that you can definitely pull from the book, but a large section, again, like almost 90 pages of stat blocks are probably not going to be that useful to you. But I will say the fact that those dragons do have just like a paragraph of write-up on them means that even if you don't use the stat blocks, that section isn't completely and totally wasted on you. And as far as like non-game affecting items for treasure hoards, like trade goods or like art objects or like gemstones or stuff like that, like those charts are still perfectly usable today, right? The only difference might be like the magic item concentration and stuff like that, but that's still useful information. And the anatomy section and the psychology and going through all of that detail, the identifiers, going into like information on dragons' layers or where they typically layer, their personality and outlooks. Yeah, that's still a really good part of, that you could use in your games today. So I recommend this if you're getting it either through a really good deal or through DM's Guild or Drive-Thru-RPG. I cannot, in good conscience, ever recommend paying more than cover price, especially for a book that is almost 20 years old now. It's just me, like I know some things go up in value and that's fine, but I don't know. It's a game, it's a book for a game. And it's out there print on demand, right? So I would recommend print on demand before going to places like eBay, or if your local game store manages to find a copy, and as long as they're charging a decent price and they're not basing it off of eBay prices, then I definitely recommend it. But this is not something, as much as I like this book, I would never recommend paying any more than, like I said, cover price for me is kind of where I would max out for a used book. But I would, maybe like it was like $60, I think, back in the day. So maybe like 75 would be like the absolute maximum that I would ever recommend paying. And this is Canadian dollars, by the way. So whatever it might be in US is a little bit different. But don't pay eBay prices, please. Don't pay eBay prices for this book. It's a good book, but I don't think any D&D book should be $100 or more, in my opinion. So yeah, I definitely recommend picking it up, but I would go through DM's Guild or Drive-Thru-RPG. And if you're interested, like I said, there are links to DM's Guild and Drive-Thru-RPG in the description in the video below, and you can check out and see what other cool stuff that they have there. So yeah, so this was a fun walk down memory lane. I think the last time I ever flipped through the book in full, I don't think I ever did it in a video before, so I really hope not, because I don't remember it. Although I've been doing this for almost 8 years, so it is definitely possible. But other than that, like I think the last time I ever really flipped through it all the way was probably when I first got it. So we're talking almost 20 years ago. So this was a lot of fun. So yeah, there you go. That's the Draconomicon for 3.5. Does it deserve to be on the list of everybody's favorite, supplements for like older editions of D&D? Yeah, it's probably fair, especially if you're running. Like if you're running 3.5 and you want to have dragons in your campaign, this book is something that I think you need. But if you're just looking for something that's fun to read, there's still a lot of cool stuff in here. And yeah, it's a book that holds up really well, and one that it's just got a great amount of detail in it that, similar books from later editions came close to copying, but never quite reached the levels that I think this one did, like the amount of detail. So definitely a great book, and it was a lot of fun flipping through it again. Anyway, let me know in the comments below. Did you pick this book up back in the day, or did you get it more recently through like DM's Guild or print on demand? Please tell me you didn't pay like $300 for this off of eBay. I've seen them listed for that, so please tell me. I hope nobody actually paid that much for it. If you did, it's your own prerogative. Like you're never gonna shame you, but I could never spend that kind of money on it. But even if you didn't, let me know what some of your favorite encounters have been involving dragons, either as a player or a dungeon master that you've gone through in your years or in your whatever amount of time you've been playing this game or running it. Let me know what some of your favorite encounters with dragons have been. Anyway, thank you guys very much for watching and sticking through this one. Hope you enjoyed, and I will see you all next time. Take care.